is a double shot here. This is Ambassador William Taylor. So you can see from America's diplomatic corps how there is a grotesque misunderstanding of how war even works. But equally so, you can tell from the way this question is posed by CNN that so-called elite media people also don't understand.
So we hear that Zelensky is insisting that a deal must have a ceasefire first. We hear the president insisting there isn't a need for a ceasefire in this war to bring it to an end. But we know toward the end of the Israel-Hamas war, one senior White House official told the Washington Post President Trump was using, quote, maximum pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire and hostage deal to end the war. Why do you think the president was willing to use maximum pressure to get a ceasefire in that conflict, but not this one?
You've answered that in the question. That is, in order to get the war to end, in order to stop all of the damage that Putin and the Russians are doing, Putin needs to decide. And Putin will decide when President Trump puts pressure on him. And you're right. President Trump knows how to put maximum pressure to get a ceasefire. That's what happened in the Middle East. That's what needs to happen in Ukraine.
To me, that is spectacular in a negative sense. That you, CNN, and you, Ambassador Taylor, are both genuinely trying to compare Trump's maximum pressure on Israel to accomplish something that Trump wanted in Hamas is equivalent to Trump putting pressure on Putin. Like it's the same. Hey, he put pressure on Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu did what he wanted there. He can do the same to Russia. He's just choosing not to. That's the implication, that Trump is just choosing not to put pressure on Putin. Maybe he likes Putin more than he likes Netanyahu. Do you see how insane that is to even say out loud? But if it's needed, let me go down and explain why that is. President Trump had leverage over Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't fire essentially, he doesn't fire one missile, one bomb, or fly an aircraft unless he has support from the United States. He requires the missiles that are fired, the bombs that are dropped, the resources that are necessary to keep planes in the air, etc., all kinds of other ammunition, and the wherewithal to keep war going. They would run dry in a very short period of time if the president of the United States ever stopped the support of military and financial to Israel. They don't have the capacity to produce or even purchase all that they need in terms of ammunition and weapons. Therefore, and of course, you can also add in also the diplomatic cover, which the United States gave just carte blanche diplomatic cover to anything that the Israeli side wanted to do, which protected it from all this censure from all over the world that it was otherwise getting and would otherwise have gotten a lot worse had it not been for the United States. That's the leverage that Trump had on Netanyahu. So as much as Netanyahu and AIPAC and several other folks, love to support the United States elections and candidates and politicians, et cetera, and the influence they have in the media and in the special resources, other kinds of media, all of those things. Trump has the ace in that deck. He can play it. Let's look over here. There's no deck here. I don't think Trump even has a couple of twos, much less the ace in the deck. Putin makes his own ammunition. He gets help from China. He gets help from North Korea. He gets help from Iran. But by and large, their mainstay is domestic. They have the natural resources. They have the manpower. They have the intellectual capacity. They have the industrial capacity. They can sustain. If everything went to hell, and even China said, we're not going to do anything with you anymore, Russia still has the capacity to keep going indefinitely with what their own domestic resources they have. Where is Trump going to have any leverage over that? Netanyahu was an ally of the United States. Would you consider, under any definition, that Russia is an ally of the United States, that we have economic pressure that we can put on them that hasn't been tried yet, or any other kind of pressure? Do you see? This is so absurd and insane. The implication that the United States can just put pressure on Putin to stop doing something that is in his national interest. And this is not like Israel that was fighting Hamas, which is a bunch of guys basically with rifles. and a couple of homemade rockets. They have Katyusha rockets. That's about it. That's all they had to worry about. They were basically driven into the holes in the ground. They would come up periodically. That's it. That's not what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. They have a complete total army and air defense, drone warfare, and then 50 nations backing them, etc. So this is something close to a peer-on-peer war with all of the modern accoutrements that go along with it here. And you want to equate this to this. That is either malpractice or it's intentional misinformation. I don't know which it is. It's unknown. I can't crawl into his head. I don't have any access to the ambassador. I don't know why CNN would be saying this, but all I know is what's being said out loud. So all we can go by is what they say. And what they say is so far detached from reality, it just beggars belief. And of course, most Americans, or many Americans anyway, are listening to these reports, and that's what they hear. They don't know. They may not think about these things I just mentioned here, and they're just going to be sitting there thinking, well, yeah, I mean, why isn't Trump doing that? And of course, that's the intent. That's what people want. These kinds of people want to put pressure on Trump, not on Zelensky, not on Putin. They want to put pressure on Trump to do something that's irrational. They want him to act as irrational as they are, which, as I keep telling you, means that ultimately they want the Ukraine side to die. They want their people to die, and they want their country to lose. That will be the result if Trump gives in to what they want to do. But they're not the only one. William Taylor, CNN. Let's now go over to an alleged military expert in the UK who also went on today, and he was saying that actually, as it turns out, Putin is the one who's confused.
I think it's true that Putin is a bit confused and a bit over-optimistic about the military situation. Putin keeps making these maximalist demands. He seems to think that he's winning this war, whereas in fact, Russia, in 12 years of fighting, has only managed to occupy 20% of Ukraine. And in the last year alone, it's occupied around 1% of Ukrainian territory at the cost of losing hundreds of thousands of troops dead and seriously wounded. Putin seems to think that he's winning the war, and his advisors presumably are telling him that. But actually, Ukraine's doing very well.
Okay. Wow. If I had a lot of harsh things to say about Ambassador Taylor, what in the world could I say about this guy who comes off and purports to be a military expert? Ukraine is doing really well. That is just stunning in the extreme. That Russia's not doing well, even though, as I've told you in recent episodes here with Stepnogorsk, Gulyapolya, Mirnograd, Rodinska, all have fallen in the last 3 or 4 days after have been all have fallen. The one place that Ukraine tried to do a counterattack in Kupiansk, they are still not able to drive Russia all the way out of that. And it's a very short period of time. That's also going to reverse just because Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, just like it was guaranteed that their incursion into Kursk was going to backfire and they were going to lose everything. It's the same thing here because there's just too many Russian troops. It's just simple as that. It's a war of attrition, not a battle. But yet here he's trying to convince all of the leaders. If CNN was trying to talk about listeners in America, here's the Times of London trying to convince listeners in UK that, yeah, just keep going. Again, he said that he lies about some things. He said Russia has been fighting this for 11 or 12 years. They haven't. There has been a civil war in Ukraine from 2014 to 2022, in those 8 years, that was supplied in large measure by the West. They never want to mention that part. Massive support from the West. And then the rebels in that fight were supported and supplied by Russia. Russia was not fighting in that war, just like the West was not fighting in the war. It was a proxy war that both the external powers were in. That's what happened for 8 years of that. This war, however, has been going on for 4 years. So let's at least talk about this in an accurate way. And it's true on the map, 1% has been lost in the last year or so. But what is also true on the map is that the Russians have now accelerated their territorial acquisitions, and they're moving faster and faster to the west, taking territory on a much more compressed timeline. And as more important than all that is that on this same 2-year period, the number of casualties Russia has inflicted on Ukraine is astronomical, a wound from which they cannot recover. Russia, whoever you want to believe about the casualties that have been infected on the Russian side, there have been some. They have been a lot, but a lot is a term that no one can define. Many on the West say it's been 1.5 million. There's no way for us to know for sure what the right is. The logic says that it's probably a fraction of that, but it's a pretty healthy fraction. So let's just, for the sake of argument, let's say that the West is, on this point, telling you the truth, and it's 1.5 million. That, when we know that the Russian military active duty is 1.5 million today, and I'm not sure how much larger it's supposed to get in 2026. I haven't heard that. But as of the end of this month, it's going to be at 1.5 million active troops. It was 990 some odd thousand total active forces on February 24th, 2022. What that tells you is that the Russian army has grown by 500,000, despite whatever all these casualties that are being alleged. They've grown 500,000 since that time. We know for sure from the Ukrainians' own side that they do not have enough manpower to offset their losses. They can't force mobilize enough people. Russia, other than the one partial mobilization they did in 2022, has never resorted to it since, because they haven't had to. They have grown it 500,000 by recruiting. So it's so far from being a crisis that they haven't even started to mobilize. If they start to mobilize, if it gets serious, they can bring in several million people. Because unlike the Ukrainians, a lot of the people that they have trained and brought on for a period of time over the years, they demobilized them. They go back to their civilian lives. And they still have 1.5 million. So there is no possibility that you're going to win a war of attrition against a side that has millions more men and a virtual unending supply of natural resources and an industrial capacity that you can never match on this side, because only the Ukraine side is at full mobilization in their industry. Nobody else in the West. The West has increased some, but only marginally so. Russia is also in an existential fight, so they substantially increased their capacity. And they're now on a level they can sustain at a high rate almost indefinitely for an extended period of time with no problem. So why would you want to get into a war of attrition with that side? Why would you want to keep waging a war of attrition with that side? And why would you want to lie to your population and tell them Putin is not doing well, but the Ukraine side is, when it's self-evident that they're not? Every metric proves it. And I'm talking about metrics from the Ukraine side. But yet that's what passes for European and Western elite these days. It just boggles the mind to see that these kinds of things can be said and no one pushes back. Well, no one other than us. One real quick, the last topic I want to talk about here, because it's also very central to this whole discussion here, as though everything I've already told you isn't already enough mountains to try and overcome. It's the issue of the Donbas in particular. That's kind of what was at the heart of this. That's what started this whole issue. That's where even the civil war was fought in the Donbas, and where now then the central issue is. And you heard Zelensky at the top of the show here talk about, 87% of the people don't want to give up the Donbas, and so they're not willing to. So that's his position here. President Trump was asked, what is your position on the Donbas?
Some mixed signals coming from Moscow, even after you spoke with President Putin, telling that Ukraine has to give up Donbas.
Well, that's what they've been asking for, and there's a dispute about that, so they're going to have to iron that out. That's an issue they have to iron out. But I think it's moving in the right direction.
They're going to have to iron that out, and they're moving in the right direction. Are they, though? Are the sides moving in the right direction? Because you see Zelensky on this episode at the top of the show said, we're not going to do that. We're not even interested in doing that. I showed you this just about a week or so ago, maybe a little bit less than a week ago, at the Federation Council. President Putin, by name, specified the Donbas is an irrevocable part of the Russian Federation. So you see their sides are moving in the opposite direction. They're hardening away. So I don't know what you're talking about when you say it's moving in the right direction. It's not. Maybe you wish that it would. It's not. And, some things you got to iron out. The things you got to iron out is both sides are saying that they're going to take the Donbas. Ukraine says what even the parts that they still possess, they're not going to get rid of. And the Russian side says we're taking all of it one way or another, and they have the power to do so. There's not a lot to iron out there. There's just either you acknowledge reality or you're going to lose it. It's really that simple. And unfortunately, it's not just Zelensky. Here on LBC Radio, there was an interview with Kira Riddick, who is a member of the Ukraine parliament, who certainly backed up President Zelensky's claim.
If Zelensky came back from one of these meetings and said, look, we've got to accept that Russia is not going to give up its claims in the Donbas, what would the reaction of the Ukrainian people be to that?
It will be a very negative reaction. Basically, that's why President Zelensky is not agreeing to give up on Ukraine's territory. First thing is because then he will be politically done. And second is because he simply doesn't have the rights according to Ukrainian constitution.
So, I mean, that's from the parliament. That matches what Jennifer said on our show a little bit ago, Jennifer Kavanaugh. That's what she said after she came back from Ukraine. She said she was privately told that the Ukrainian Rada would not support it. And here's this member of the Rada validating that. We're not going to do it. The people wouldn't do it. Zelensky doesn't have the authority to do it. So she is inflected by the same malady that Zelensky and the Europeans are. She sees what she wants. She sees what she describes as fair and unfair and says, no, we're not going to do it. And I cannot more firmly and painfully tell you and exclaim, if you hold that position, if Zelensky holds his position, you will lose not just the remainder of the Donbas, but you will lose much more. Almost certainly, in my view, whenever that may take, even if it did take another couple of years, they can do it. The Russians can do it. You'll lose probably everything to the Dnieper River up to Kiev, everything. And almost certainly, I can't even imagine a scenario where Russia would not take Odessa and shut off and control all of the Black Sea fleet, Black Sea access. That's what you're going to win by having this just and lasting position. So whether it's Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Mark Rutte, Ursula von der Leyen, or this member of the parliament here, Volodymyr Zelensky, you guys can all hold that position all day long. You can wrap your arms around each other and hold hands and show this position of unity. You can get not 95%, you can get 100% agreement on your side. And all you're going to do is guarantee that Russia will not stop until it's taken all of this territory. That's where we're at. I'm just telling you the hard truth here. These are the unpleasant truths that for some reason nobody on mainstream media wants to talk about. And it's one thing not to talk about it, but it's another thing to misinform people on their shows to make them believe that there's a choice that can be made. All Trump has to do is decide he's going to put pressure on Putin. All Zelensky has to do is decide he's not going to give up the Donbas, and that a just and lasting peace, according to Keir Starmer, will somehow be the result. It won't. It won't. And history is going to be just vicious on these people. All those names I just mentioned are all going to be going down in history as those who together led to the destruction of the Ukraine. And a lot more is going to go along with that. There's virtually no rational way it can be any way else. That's the truth of it. One last thing I do want to talk about here today, because Trump mentioned something, and he did say something that I think is accurate and that we should listen to. One of the last things he was asked is, especially in light of all these concessions that are required from the Ukraine side, especially as it returns to Donbas, what if there is no agreement and the war continues on?
President Trump, I know you sound an optimistic note here, but what happens in a few weeks if things sputter? What are you prepared to do?
They keep fighting, and they keep dying. No good. But if things don't happen, they keep fighting, and they keep dying. And we don't want that to happen. He doesn't want it to happen. President Putin doesn't want it to happen either.
Well, I guess he doesn't really want it to happen, Zelensky, when Trump motioned over to him. But he is laying the foundation for it. The hardest thing for him to do, because of the significant political headwinds that would be against him, especially in the Rada, the hard right in Ukraine is very well known as being adamantly opposed to any concessions whatsoever to Russia. Anybody's talking about peace, there has been a lot of credible reporting that Zelensky would be killed by his own people if he did that. I don't discount that well may be true, and that it's a pressure he would have to worry about. And I still say it doesn't matter. He has to do it. If the risk of your own life to do the right thing is the price, then the leader of the country must do that. Because to say, I'm not going to go against the political headwinds and I'm not going to risk my life by going against these far right people who have power in my country, I'm just going to let the war continue going on until eventually Russia's soldiers do what they're going to do. Then you are, by not being willing to put your own life at risk, you are being willing to guaranteed sacrifice tens and possibly hundreds, thousands more of your own countrymen's death in the eventual loss of your sovereign territory, access to the sea, which goes along with it all your future prosperity possibilities. That's where we're at, folks. Trump is right in that regard. If there's no agreement that comes, if we just waffle on, then the killing will continue on, the fighting will continue on, and the losses will keep stacking up. That's where we are. That's the hard truth of it. So while a lot of people want to have optimistic comments here that here's, there's a chance for peace, that maybe we're 90% of the way, we're not. We weren't 90% of the way there when Trump met with Zelensky in February. We weren't 90% of the way there when Trump met with Zelensky, met with Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, when this 28-point peace plan came out, when this 20-point peace plan came out, when this meeting here now at Mar-a-Lago, none of it's true. We're not 90% of the way anywhere. Nobody that matters has moved. Ukraine has not moved. Russia has not moved. The only thing that moves is the front line and the stacking of body counts. That does move. And it's going to continue going in the direction it's been going until either sanity prevails on the West and they do the hard right thing, or they keep with this fantasy and this fiction and they lose it all.